days. I wrote those numbers in the margins of every book they let me borrow from the small library at Pinehurst. I wrote them under my bed frame, where no one ever looked. I wrote them on the inside of my left forearm with a ballpoint pen every morning in numbers so small that the nurses thought they were just ink stains. And on that Tuesday morning in April at 4:17 in the morning, I finally walked out the side door of Pinehurst Youth Behavioral Center, carrying $41 in cash, an empty brass locket I had worn since I was 4 years old, and a folded slip of paper with the only address I had in this world. My name is Ethan Boone. I was 19 years old that morning, and this is the story of how a rusted yellow school bus brought me home. Let me tell you something before I go any further. I was never sick. Not in the way they wrote on my paperwork. Not in the way my Uncle Dorsey told the judge when I was 13 years old standing in a courtroom in a button-up shirt that didn't fit me, watching my grandfather sit in a wheelchair with his hands shaking, unable to remember my name on most days. I had counted every day for 2,247 days. I wrote those numbers in the margins of every book they let me borrow from the small library at Pinehurst. I wrote them under my bed frame, where no one ever looked. I wrote them on the inside of my left forearm with a ballpoint pen every morning in numbers so small that the nurses thought they were just ink stains. And on that Tuesday morning in April at 4:17 in the morning, I finally walked out the side door of Pinehurst Youth Behavioral Center, carrying $41 in cash, an empty brass locket I had worn since I was 4 years old, and a folded slip of paper with the only address I had in this world. My name is Ethan Boone. I was 19 years old that morning, and this is the story of how a rusted yellow school bus brought me home. Let me tell you something before I go any further. I was never sick. Not in the way they wrote on my paperwork. Not in the way my Uncle Dorsey told the judge when I was 13 years old, standing in a courtroom in a button-up shirt that didn't fit me, watching my grandfather sit in a wheelchair with his hands shaking, unable to remember my name on most days. I was a normal boy. I cried sometimes. I got angry sometimes. I missed my grandfather so much that some nights I couldn't breathe. But I was not the kind of sick that locks a child away for 6 years. The day they brought me in, I was 13 and a half. I had been in foster care for 2 months. A social worker had picked me up from a group home in Dayton and driven me out to a long brick building behind a chain-link fence, surrounded by pine trees that gave the place its name. A doctor I never saw again signed a paper. My Uncle Dorsey signed a paper. And just like that, I belonged to Pinehurst. For 6 years, I learned what the days felt like there. The fluorescent lights that hummed even when they were off. The smell of disinfectant and cafeteria green beans. The sound of locked doors closing behind you. The way the nurses' shoes squeaked on the polished linoleum at 3 in the morning during bed checks. I learned to keep my head down. I learned never to argue. I learned that the louder you protest the wrong, the longer they keep you. So I went quiet. I read every book I could get my hands on. I taught myself math from a workbook another patient had abandoned. I exercised in my room with push-ups and sit-ups every morning before breakfast until my body remembered it was strong. And I waited. But waiting alone would never have gotten me out. What got me out was Nurse Adeline. Adeline Foster was 58 years old with short gray hair that she pinned back from her face and a tired kind look that I recognized from the very first day. She had worked at Pinehurst for 22 years. She had seen everything. And after about a year of watching me, she started to look at me a little differently than the others did. It started with small things. An extra piece of cornbread at supper. A library book I had asked for slipped onto my pillow with no note. A whispered, "Good morning, son," when she did rounds. She didn't talk to me about my case, not for years. She wasn't allowed to, but one winter night when I was about 17, she sat down across from me in the day room while I was reading, and she looked at me with the saddest eyes I've ever seen on a human being. And she said this, "Ethan, honey, I've been a nurse a long time. I know the difference between a sick child and a child somebody wanted out of the way. You hold on, you hear me, you just hold on." That was the first time anyone at Pinehurst had told me they believed me. For the next 2 years, Adeline became my quiet ally. She brought me information from the outside world. She told me my grandfather had passed away in the spring of my 15th year, 14 months after they took me in. The Pinehurst staff had never told me. I had been waiting all that time for a visit that was never going to come. When Adeline finally told me, I did not cry in front of her. I waited until lights out. I cried into a pillow for 2 hours as quietly as I could, because if you cried too loud at Pinehurst, they made notes in your file. She told me my Uncle Dorsey had taken over everything. The bus, the house if there had ever been one, the papers, the bank accounts. And in February of my 19th year on a Thursday afternoon, when she was sweeping the floor of my room, she set a small folded slip of paper on my bedside table and walked out without a word. The paper read, Eleanor Pike, Pike Storage Facility, Route 40, east of Dayton. Tell her you are Samuel Boone's grandson. She has something for you. 3 weeks later, Adeline did the bravest thing anyone has ever done for me. She slipped a copy of the side door key into my breakfast tray under a stack of paper napkins. She left a small envelope on my pillow containing $41 in worn bills, and tucked inside the envelope was a tiny piece of paper with her sister's phone number in Brookville, Ohio. She rearranged her shift schedule so that on Tuesday morning, April 14th, at 4:17 in the morning, she would be the one signing off on the night log when I disappeared. I will never forget her face the night before. She passed me in the hallway during evening medication rounds, and she did not look at me. She just whispered very softly as she walked by. Go home, son. There's a house waiting for you. That morning I dressed in the dark. I put on the old gray hoodie Adeline had smuggled in for me. I put the locket around my neck, the brass locket my grandfather had given me when I was 4 years old, with nothing inside it but a tiny brass hinge. I tucked the $41 and the slip of paper into my pocket, and I walked. The side door opened with no resistance at all. The cool April air hit my face like the first taste of a clean glass of water. Outside, the parking lot was almost empty. The pine trees stood black against a sky that was just starting to think about morning. I did not run. Running would have drawn attention. I walked, hands in my pockets, like a young man on his way to a very early shift somewhere. I walked past the pine trees, past the chain-link fence, at the property line, past the bus stop sign that read Route 9, Dayton downtown. The first Greyhound bus did not come until 5:30. I sat on a bench in the dark with my hood pulled up and my hands trembling, and my heart beating so loud I thought a passing driver might hear it. A radio was playing through the open window of an old pickup truck parked at the gas station across the road. A morning news bulletin came on. A man was reading the headlines. And in local news, Pinehurst Behavioral Center has reported that a 19-year-old resident left the facility without authorization sometime in the early morning hours. Authorities are asking the public to be on the lookout. I lowered my head. My breath caught in my throat. But it was the next sentence that stopped my heart. And we go now to a statement from a family member of the missing young man. A voice came on the radio. A man's voice. Smooth, controlled, full of practiced concern. My nephew has struggled with his condition for many years. We are simply asking that anyone who sees him calls the authorities immediately so that we can get him the care he needs. I knew that voice. It was Dorsey. My Uncle Dorsey was already on the radio 6 hours after I walked out the door, painting me as a danger to the public. Listen, before I tell you what I found at Pike Storage, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone in your life who pretended to love you while quietly doing you harm? Someone who smiled at you in public and locked the doors at home? If this story has touched something in you so far, would you take a moment to subscribe to this channel and leave a comment below, telling me what was the moment you finally saw the truth? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Now let me take you on the bus to Dayton. The Greyhound pulled in at 5:34. I climbed on, paid $18 cash for a ticket to the east side of town, and slid into a seat in the very back row by the window. The driver did not look at me twice. To him, I was just another tired young man with a hood pulled up against the morning chill. I watched the sun come up over Ohio. I watched the trees and the fields and the gas stations and the long flat stretches of nothing. And I tried to remember what the world had looked like before they locked me away. By 6:45, I was standing on Route 40 in front of a hand-painted sign that read, Pike Storage open 6 days. The lot stretched out behind a chain-link fence topped with old razor wire. A single-wide trailer served as the office. There was no one there. I walked around the side, calling softly. Hello, Eleanor Pike. A woman came around the back of the trailer carrying a sack of cedar mulch on her shoulder. She was in her early 60s, maybe 62, with short gray hair, work boots, and the kind of weather-lined face that told you she had spent her whole life outside. She set the mulch down and looked at me. She did not just glance at me. She looked at me. Her eyes moved over the hoodie, the empty hands, the brass locket against my collarbone. Then she said one word. Samuel. She said my grandfather's name like a prayer. I cleared my throat. I'm his grandson. I'm Ethan. Eleanor Pike took 2 steps toward me. She put one hand on my shoulder very gently, the way you might touch a wild bird that had landed on your porch. Her eyes filled up with tears. She did not wipe them away. "Boy," she said, "I have been waiting for you for 7 years." She led me through the lot past rows of padlocked units and old shipping containers all the way to the back corner. There, beneath a sagging metal awning, sat a 1994 Bluebird school bus. The yellow paint had faded to the color of old butter. The tires were flat and sunk into the gravel. Weeds had grown up around the wheel wells. The blue stripe of tape I had put on the driver's side mirror when I was 7 years old, because I thought it made the bus look fast, was still there. I stopped walking. I think I forgot how to breathe. Eleanor stood beside me. She let me look. "Your grandfather drove this bus in the day the state took you," she said finally. "He parked it right here." He handed me the key. He told me, "Eleanor, if my boy comes looking for it someday, you give it to him. And if he never comes, don't let them crush it." "How much do you charge to keep a bus 7 years? $55 a month." "That's almost $5,000. She shrugged. "Your grandfather fixed my furnace twice, fixed my truck 3 times, fixed the steps on my back porch when my husband was too sick to do it. Never let me pay him more than the cost of the parts. I owed him more than I could ever pay back. So I kept his bus." I could not speak. I just stared at the yellow paint. Eleanor pulled a small brass key from her pocket. It was worn smooth from years of being carried. "Take your time, son. Take all the time you need." The bus door opened with a long, low groan like an old animal waking up. The smell hit me, first vinyl seats and motor oil and something else underneath it, something I could not name but recognized the way you recognize the smell of your own bedroom in the dark. I climbed the 3 steps. My grandfather had gutted that bus when I was 4 years old. He had ripped out the seats, built cabinets from scrap wood, bolted down a fold-down table, run a propane line for a 2-burner stove. He had built a narrow bed along the left wall, hung flannel curtains in the windows, and turned a yellow school bus into the only home I remembered before they took me away. The pencil marks on the doorframe were still there. Every birthday he had measured me. The last one was at 4 feet 9 inches, age 12. The year his memory began to leave him. I ran my hand along the cabinet doors. He had sanded every edge by hand so I would never get a splinter. The flannel curtains were stiff with dust now, but the pattern was the same small blue flowers on a cream background fabric we had bought together at a quilt shop in Tennessee when I was 8. I sat down in the driver's seat. The vinyl cracked under me. The leather wrap on the steering wheel was peeling. Through the dusty windshield I could see Eleanor standing by her trailer, pretending not to watch. I closed my eyes. I was 8 years old, sitting on my grandfather's lap on a dirt road outside of Knoxville. His big hands were over mine on the wheel. His voice was in my ear, low and warm and patient. "Steady now, son. You got it. Steady now." I opened my eyes, and that's when I remembered the rule. There was one seat my grandfather had never removed when he gutted the bus. The seat directly behind the driver's position. He had kept it, bolted it down himself, and told me when I was small that it was structural, that it braced a support beam in the floor. But there had also been a rule, one of the only rules he ever gave me. "Don't ever mess with that seat, Ethan. Don't pry it. Don't take it apart. Promise me." I had promised him. I had kept that promise for 15 years. I knelt down beside it now. The vinyl was cracked worse than the others, split along the seams. I could see something through the gap, the edge of dark green metal that was not part of the seat frame. My hand shook as I worked my fingers under the vinyl. The cover came away in brittle strips. Beneath the foam, bolted to the metal frame, was a small green metal box about the size of a shoebox, a military surplus box, the kind soldiers use to keep papers dry. The latch was rusted shut. I found a flathead screwdriver in the toolbox under the sink, where my grandfather had always kept it. I pried the latch open. The lid was stiff. I had to work it side to side for almost a minute before it gave. Inside, wrapped in olive drab oilcloth, folded carefully at the corners, were 4 things. A leather journal, the cover cracked and soft from age. A savings passbook from First Federal Savings of Ohio with a rubber band around it. A folded document with a county seal on the front. and a white envelope sealed with 2 words written across the front in my grandfather's handwriting. For Ethan. I picked up the passbook first. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely turn the pages. The entries were in my grandfather's handwriting. $25, $50, $75, 100, 20, going back 18 years, one deposit at a time. Every other Friday like clockwork in the small, careful numbers of a man who had never made much money, but who saved what he could. The final balance written in pencil at the bottom of the last page read $28,750. The account was in my name. Ethan Daniel Boone, custodial account under UTMA State of Ohio. I sat down on the floor of the bus. I held that passbook in my hands and I could not move. For 19 years I had believed that no one had ever set anything aside for me. Not a dollar, not a thought, not a future. The passbook in my hand said something else. It said somebody had been thinking about me every other Friday for 18 years straight, with the slow, patient love of a man who never made much money, but who saved what he could. I unfolded the document with the county seal. A property deed. A quarter-acre lot in a place called Ashford Hollow, 4 hours south of Dayton, recorded in the Ross County Clerk's office 13 years ago. The deed was in my name, too. I picked up the journal. The first page was dated almost 14 years ago when I was 5 years old. My grandfather's handwriting was steady and clear back then, in the days before the tremor came. Bought the land today. $6,500. Quarter-acre lot on the south side of town up against the tree line. There's a creek at the back. Ethan would love it. Took me 4 years to save it. Going to start the foundation next spring. A real house for my boy. 4 walls and a roof that doesn't have wheels under it. I turned the page. Poured the footings this weekend. Drove down Friday night, worked Saturday, and Sunday drove back Monday morning to pick Ethan up from school. He asked where I went. I told him I was fixing somebody's roof. Which isn't a lie exactly. I'm fixing his. I turned the page again. And again. For 3 years my grandfather had been quietly building a house for me 4 hours away from the bus we lived on every weekend he could spare. He never told me. He never wanted me to know until it was finished. I picked up the white envelope last. The handwriting on the front was different. Shakier. Written later. Maybe after the tremor had started. I did not open it. Not yet. I gathered everything back into the green metal box and climbed out of the bus. Eleanor was sitting on the trailer step with a thermos of coffee. She looked up when I came around the corner. She did not ask me anything. She just patted the step beside her and I sat down. I opened the box. I let her see. She read the passbook. She read the deed. She read the first page of the journal. She set everything back very carefully like she was handling old photographs. "That old man," she said, and her voice broke. "That old man was building you a house. I didn't know. He didn't want you to. That was Samuel. He never told you what he was doing for you. He just did it." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. And then she reached into the pocket of her work jacket. She pulled out a second envelope. This one had no name on the front. "Adeline sent me this," she said, "about a month ago. She didn't tell me what was in it. She just told me to give it to you when you came." I opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies. 3 pages of medical paperwork from Pinehurst. My commitment forms. The signature of the admitting doctor at the bottom. And clipped behind them a 4th page. A sworn affidavit from a man named Dr. Raymond Hatch of Springfield, Ohio, stating that the signature on my commitment paperwork was not his, that he had never examined me, that he had never met me, that the signature was a forgery. Adeline had been investigating my case for almost 2 years. I sat down on the gravel beside the trailer. I held those papers in my hands. "Ethan," Eleanor said softly, "you were never sick, not for 1 day. They locked you up on a forged piece of paper." I had already known it. I had known it for 6 years. But to hold the proof of it in my own 2 hands, that was something else entirely. "Boy," Eleanor said, "you need to get to Ashford Hollow, today, before your uncle figures out where you went. I don't have a car. I don't even have a driver's license." She stood up. She pulled a set of truck keys from her jacket pocket and jingled them. "My old pickup runs just fine. I can have you there by sunset." I looked at her. "Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me." She looked back at the bus, the faded yellow paint, the blue tape on the mirror, the weeds growing through the gravel. I knew, Samuel, that's enough. And then she said something I will never forget as long as I live. Honey, your grandfather spent 20 years driving around this country fixing things for people he barely knew. Most of them never said thank you. The least somebody can do is the same for his boy. I picked up the green metal box. I picked up the empty brass locket around my neck. And I followed Eleanor Pike to her old red pickup truck. We left Dayton heading south on the interstate just before noon. The April sun was high and pale. The fields were just starting to turn green. I sat in the passenger seat with the journal open on my lap. I was looking for one thing, one name. The name I had been afraid to look for my whole life, my mother. For 19 years, my Uncle Dorsey had told me the same story. My mother had walked out when I was a baby. She did not want me. That was why my grandfather had to raise me. That was why I had no one. That was why eventually I was the kind of broken that needed to be locked away. I had carried that story inside me like a stone. But somewhere on page 43 of my grandfather's journal, I found this entry. Drove through Marietta today, past the church where Marin used to sing in the choir. Ethan was asleep in the back of the bus. I almost woke him up to show him. But what would I say? This is where your mother used to sing before she died. The boy doesn't even know she's dead. I read that sentence 3 times. The boy doesn't even know she's dead. My hands went still on the page. Eleanor glanced over from the driver's seat. She saw my face. Without a word, she pulled the pickup off onto the gravel shoulder, killed the engine, and waited for me to be ready. After a long minute, I handed her the journal and pointed to the entry. She read it. Her lips moved a little as she went through the words. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "that's not what they told you, is it?" "No. Your uncle told you she left. He told me she didn't want me. He told me that for 19 years. Eleanor closed the journal. She handed it back to me. She put her hand over mine on the cover and squeezed it hard. Then we are going to find out the truth. Today, together. She started the engine. She pulled back onto the interstate. And we drove south toward a small town called Ashford Hollow, where my grandfather had been building me a house since I was 6 years old, and where the truth about my mother had been waiting for me my entire life. The sun was going down when we crossed the Ross County line. Eleanor turned off the state route onto a 2-lane road that wound through farm country. Old white barns, tall silos, mailboxes set at the end of long gravel driveways with names painted on the sides in faded letters. The light was the color of honey on the fields. I had not eaten since breakfast at Pinehurst, which felt like it had happened in another life. My stomach was tight, but it was not from hunger. It was from the slow-building feeling that I was about to see something I had been moving toward for my entire life, without knowing it. Eleanor checked the deed against a road sign and turned down a gravel road. Past a mailbox with no name. Past a stand of old oaks. And then she slowed the truck to a stop. There it is. I looked. A 1/4 acre of land, bordered by old oaks on 3 sides. The grass was waist-high and gone to seed. A creek ran along the back through the trees. I could hear it from the truck, the soft, steady sound of moving water. And rising up from the overgrowth, in the orange and lavender light of the dying day, was the frame of a house. It was not a finished house, not yet. But it was further along than I had let myself hope. The foundation was solid concrete, poured level, no cracks I could see. The walls were framed up on all 4 sides, studs and headers, and bracing all plumb, all straight. The roof was half shingled with tar paper exposed on the unfinished side. The wood had weathered to a soft gray over 7 years of Ohio winters. My grandfather had built it the way he built everything. Slowly, carefully, the right way. I got out of the truck and walked through the tall grass. My legs felt strange under me, like they were not quite mine. I stepped over a stack of lumber that had been covered with a tarp, now half rotted. I climbed through what would someday be the front door frame, and I stood inside the house my grandfather had built for me. 4 rooms, just like the journal said. A kitchen to the left, a living room to the right, a short hallway leading to 2 bedrooms in the back. The floor was plywood subflooring, warped a little in one corner, where rain had gotten in through the unfinished roof. I walked to the back of the house. I found the bedroom on the east side. My bedroom. The room my grandfather had framed for me, when I was 6 years old. The window opening faced east, so I would get the morning light. He had written it in the journal. I put my hand on the rough wood of the window frame, and I felt something inside me that I had not felt in a very long time. Something I did not have a word for then. I have a word for it now. It was the feeling of being known. A flashlight beam swept across the wall behind me. I turned. A woman was standing in the doorframe of the bedroom. She was in her early 70s, silver hair pulled back, wearing a canvas work jacket and a pair of work boots that had seen real years of use. She had a flashlight in one hand and a covered casserole dish in the other. She studied my face in the dim light. For a long moment she did not speak. Then she let out a soft sound like a breath she had been holding for a long time. "Lord," she said, "you have your mother's eyes." She set the casserole dish down on a stack of lumber. She held out her hand. "My name is Beatrice Calloway. Folks call me Bee. I live a quarter mile through those trees. I have been your grandfather's neighbor for 15 years. And son, I have been waiting to meet you for a very, very long time." She brought us back to her house through the woods. The path was narrow but clear. Bee walked ahead of us with her flashlight pointing out a fallen branch here, a low spot there. The creek ran along to our left. The April air was cool and full of the smell of new leaves and damp earth. Her house was a small white farmhouse with a porch that ran along the front and a kitchen window that glowed warm yellow in the dusk. A black cat was sitting on the porch railing watching us come up the path. A wind chime tinkled softly from the eaves. Inside the kitchen smelled like pot roast and fresh biscuits and something else, something I had not smelled in 6 years and almost did not recognize. It smelled like a home. Bee sat us down at her kitchen table. She put a plate of pot roast and mashed potatoes in front of me. She poured coffee for Eleanor. She set a basket of biscuits, still warm from the oven, in the middle of the table. I picked up my fork. I took one bite. I had to set the fork down. My hand was shaking too hard to hold it. Bee reached across the table and rested her hand on top of mine. She held my hand there until the shaking stopped. It had been 6 years since anyone had made a meal for me. 6 years since anyone had sat down across a table from me and looked at me like I mattered. I cried at that table. Quietly. I am not ashamed to tell you that. I had 19 years of held-back grief in me, and it came out over a plate of pot roast in a stranger's kitchen in a town I had never been to before. When I was finished crying, when I had wiped my face with the paper napkin Bee handed me, I looked up at her, and I asked the question I had been afraid to ask my whole life. "Bee, can you tell me about my mother?" She folded her hands on the table. She took a long breath. "Her name was Marin," she said. "Marin Boone. She was your grandfather's only daughter. And she was the brightest, kindest woman I think I ever knew." Bee got up. She walked to a cabinet in the corner of the kitchen. She came back carrying a small wooden box about the size of a hat box that had been sanded smooth and stained a soft walnut brown. "Your grandfather gave me this 7 years ago, right before he went into the facility. He told me, Bee, if my boy ever comes to this house, you give him this box. Don't open it. Don't ask. Just give it to him. I have kept it on that shelf for 7 years." She set the box in front of me. "I think tonight is the night." I opened it. Inside were 3 things: a stack of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. There must have been 100 of them. Maybe more. A small framed photograph face down, and a folded report, the kind a lawyer might prepare, with a Ross County address typed at the top. I picked up the photograph first. I turned it over. A young woman, maybe 25 years old, was sitting on a porch step with a baby in her lap. The woman had dark hair pulled back. She was laughing, really laughing, with her head tipped back and her teeth showing. The baby was reaching up to grab her chin, and his face was round and serious in the way babies are serious about important things. On the back in faded ink were 4 words: Marin and Ethan. First summer. I held that photograph in both hands. For 19 years, I had not known what my mother's face looked like. She had been laughing. She had been holding me. She had been laughing while she was holding me. I sat in Bee Calloway's kitchen with Eleanor's hand on my shoulder and Bee's eyes full of tears, and I looked at my mother's face for the first time in my life. "Wait. I want you to do something for me right here. If your eyes are full right now, if you have ever found yourself longing for a face you couldn't remember, please leave a single word in the comments below. Just one word that tells me you're here. Mothers, daughters, sisters, we all know this ache. And before I tell you what those letters were, if you have not already, please subscribe to this channel, because what comes next is the moment the whole story turns. Now, let me tell you about the letters. B poured me a fresh cup of coffee. She let me sit with the photograph for a few minutes. Then, very gently, she nodded toward the stack of letters. Those are letters your grandfather wrote. Over the course of about 9 years. Some of them are to lawyers. Some of them are to the insurance company. Some of them are to the bank. And some of them are to you. I picked up the stack. I untied the blue ribbon. There were 147 envelopes. I counted them later. The earliest one was dated 3 months after my mother died. I was 3 years old at the time. I unfolded that first letter. It was addressed to the Ohio Department of Insurance, to whom it may concern. I am writing about the life insurance policy of my daughter Marin Lynn Boone, who passed away on January 19th. I am her father, and I am the legal guardian of her only child, my grandson Ethan Daniel Boone, age 3. I have been informed that the beneficiary of her policy has been changed to my nephew Dorsey Boone without my knowledge. I do not believe this change was made with Marin's consent. I am requesting an investigation. I read the next one, and the one after that, and the one after that. For 9 years, my grandfather had written letters to the insurance company, to the Ohio Attorney General's office, to 3 different lawyers, to the bank where my mother had kept her account, to the social worker who handled my case, to anyone he thought might help him. He had been trying to get back the $180,000 in life insurance money that my mother had left for me. He had been trying for 9 years, and every single response in that stack of letters said the same thing. The paperwork had been signed. The notary stamp was valid. There was no legal basis for an investigation. My Uncle Dorsey had taken everything my mother had left me. And my grandfather had spent 9 years of his life, quiet, patient years, the kind of years a man spends when he loves someone more than himself, trying to get it back. I set the letters down. I picked up the folded report. It was a private investigator's report. My grandfather had hired a man named John Mercer of Chillicothe, Ohio, 11 years ago. The report detailed every financial transaction my uncle had made for 5 years after my mother's death. Bank transfers, wire transfers, a new car, a down payment on a house in a suburb of Cincinnati. The conclusion at the bottom of the report was one sentence. Mr. Dorsey Boone has converted the entirety of the deceased's life insurance proceeds to personal use. Recommend referral to the county prosecutor. I looked up at B. Did my grandfather ever file the report with the prosecutor? B shook her head slowly. By the time the report came in, his mind was already starting to go. He couldn't remember what he had hired the man to do. He couldn't follow the paperwork anymore. He used to sit on my porch in the evenings holding that folder in his lap, and he would say to me, "B, I need to do something. I need to do something, but I can't remember what." She closed her eyes for a moment. And then your uncle came for him. And after that, your uncle came for you. I sat there for a very long time. I thought about my grandfather sitting on this porch, holding that folder, trying to remember the name of the man who had stolen everything from his grandson, knowing he was running out of time. And then I thought about my mother. B, how did my mother die? B took a slow breath. She folded her hands on the table. Marin was a registered nurse at Chillicothe Memorial Hospital. She worked the overnight shift in the emergency room. She loved that job. She used to tell me she felt closest to herself at 3 in the morning when the world was quiet and people needed her. On the night of January 19th, it had been snowing. The roads were bad, black ice. She finished her shift at 2 in the morning, and she got in her car to drive home to you and your grandfather. B paused. She looked at me very steadily. She never made it home, sweetheart. Her car went off the bridge over Paint Creek, about half a mile from your grandfather's place. The police ruled it an accident. Black ice. A young nurse driving home tired in bad weather. A terrible loss. She reached across the table again. She was on her way home to you, Ethan. That is the most important part. She was always on her way home to you. I lowered my head to the table. I did not cry. There was nothing left in me to cry. I just rested my forehead against the cool wood of B. Calloway's kitchen table, and I let the truth settle into me like water into dry ground. My mother had not left me. My mother had been driving home. My mother had been laughing in a photograph holding her baby boy. And my uncle had taken everything from her and from me and had spent 6 years of my life making sure I would never be in any position to ask questions. I slept that night in B's spare bedroom in a real bed under a quilt that smelled like cedar and lavender. The window faced east. I left the curtains open on purpose. I wanted to wake up to the light. The next morning I started the work. B took me out to her garage. She rolled open the big door. And there stacked along the back wall in old milk crates were every tool my grandfather had ever owned. He had brought them to her, she said, the weekend before. His mind finally gave out. He had carried them across the field, one box at a time, in the dark. And when he had set the last box down on her garage floor, he had told her, "Hold on to these for the boy, just in case." A framing hammer with electrical tape wrapped around the handle. A speed square worn to silver from years of use. Chisels in a canvas roll, a circular saw, a level, a whole set of screwdrivers organized by size. At the bottom of the last crate was a yellow legal pad. 2 pages of my grandfather's handwriting. A list of every task remaining on the house. Numbered in order: roofing, sheathing, window installation, rough electrical, insulation, drywall, plumbing, porch framing, paint. He had estimated the material cost next to each line. The total at the bottom of the page was $8,400. I had $28,750 in a savings account in my name. I had enough. For 3 weeks I worked from before sunrise until after dark. I walked 7 miles north on the state road that first Tuesday morning in the gray pre-dawn light, with my grandfather's roofing list in my pocket. I came to a hardware store called Whitley Hardware on the edge of a town called Ashford Hollow that I had never set foot in before. The man behind the counter was in his early 50s. Salt and pepper beard, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a denim work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looked up when I came in. "Help you. I need 3-tab shingles, roofing nails, starter strip, about 30 bundles worth." He set his glasses down slowly. "You building something, son?" "Finishing something. My grandfather started a house on Plum Creek Road. I'm picking up where he left off." The man stared at me for a long moment. Then he came around the counter and held out his hand. "Hollis Whitley, and your grandfather was Samuel Boone." "Yes, sir." "Son, your grandfather bought every nail and every board for that house from this store. Drove down every other Friday for almost 5 years. Loaded up that old yellow bus of his, and drove out to the lot." Hollis paused. He shook his head slowly. "He talked about you every single time. My grandson can fix an engine better than most grown men. My grandson read 3 books this week. Every time. I had to look away. Down at the counter. Because if I looked at Hollis Whitley's face one more second, I was going to come apart, and I had work to do that day." "I have the money," I said. "It's in a bank account my grandfather set up. I haven't gotten to the bank yet. I'm not worried about the money. I'll put it on account. Pay me when you can." He paused. "I need somebody in the back 3 mornings a week. Stocking inventory delivery runs. $12 an hour cash. You interested?" "I'm interested. Start Tuesday, 7 sharp. Bring work gloves." Hollis delivered the roofing supplies himself that afternoon in his pickup. He refused gas money. He helped me unload the bundles next to the house. Before he left, he stood looking at the framing with his arms crossed. "Your grandfather did good work, Ethan. The frame is plumb. The corners are true. You finish this house right, this house will stand 100 years. And then the community started coming. I do not know how the word got out. Maybe Hollis told someone. Maybe B did. Maybe it spread by itself the way news spreads in small towns, from front porch to front porch. The next morning, a man pulled up the gravel road in a pickup full of 2x4s and a roll of house wrap. He rolled down his window. "You Samuel's grandson?" "I am. Your granddaddy fixed my well pump 12 years ago. Drove 3 hours to get here. Charged me $40. I heard you're finishing his house. Where you want the lumber." The day after that, a woman from the next farm over brought rolls of fiberglass insulation. A retired electrician named Curtis drove in from the next county and spent 2 Saturdays running wire through the studs. A couple from town showed up with a used kitchen sink, a box of copper fittings, and a chicken pot pie still warm from the oven. 4 women from the Methodist Church on Main Street formed what they called a meal rotation. Every other evening, one of them would drive out to B's house with a covered dish pot roast chicken and dumplings, meatloaf, scalloped potatoes, sweet tea in a mason jar. Every dish came with a handwritten note. "Welcome home, Ethan. We knew your granddaddy. He was a good man." Nobody asked for anything in return. Nobody made a speech about it. They came. They did what they could. They left. Bea watched it all from her front porch with her coffee and a look on her face that said she had been expecting it. "People don't forget kindness, son. They just wait for a chance to give it back." I worked, from 5 in the morning until the sun went down. Through blisters and sore shoulders and a back that ached so badly some nights, I could barely climb the porch steps at Bea's house. The roof went on. The sheathing went up. Curtis came back and finished the electrical. The insulation went into the walls. I started hanging drywall in the living room. The house began to look like a house. And every night, lying in Bea's spare bedroom, I read another page of my grandfather's journal by flashlight. I read about my mother as a young girl climbing trees and reading books and singing in the church choir on Sunday mornings. I read about how she had wanted to be a nurse since she was 7 years old. I read about the day I was born, a long entry written when I was about a week old, in which my grandfather described me as the smallest, finest thing I have ever held in my 2 hands. I read every word. And every Sunday evening I called Adeline from Bea's kitchen phone. She had given me her sister's number the night I left Pinehurst, hidden inside the envelope of $41. I had only used it twice, once to tell her I had made it to Eleanor's, once to tell her I had reached the house. Now I called her every Sunday. I told her about the roof, about the framing, about Bea's pot roast, about the way the morning light came through the east-facing window of my bedroom. She did not say much. She just listened the way she had always listened, with the patient kindness of a woman who had spent her whole life waiting for one of her boys to finally make it home. And then on the night of April 28th, just before midnight, the wind started. I want to stop here for a moment. I want you to lean in, because what I'm about to tell you was the night I almost gave up. I want to ask you something before I tell you what happened. Have you ever worked so hard for something that you thought your heart would break if you lost it? If so, leave a heart in the comments below. Just one heart. So I know you're with me. And please, if this story has meant something to you so far, take a moment to subscribe, because I cannot tell you what comes next without you here beside me. Ohio gets tornadoes in the spring. Not the great wide killer storms of Oklahoma. Smaller ones. Brief, sudden, mean. They come down out of a green sky, take what they want, and lift again before you can run for the basement. The storm came through Ashford Hollow at 12:45 in the morning. The power went out. The wind sounded like a freight train. Bea and I sat at her kitchen table by candlelight, and she held my hand, and we waited. It was over in 11 minutes. In the morning, I walked through the trees to the house. The east wall of the framing was gone. The wind had peeled it off the foundation like the lid of a tin can. The lumber I had stacked under the tarp was scattered across the yard. The drywall I had hung in what would have been the kitchen was destroyed. 3 of the windows were broken. I stood in the middle of the wreckage, and for the first time since I had walked out of Pinehurst, I felt something crack inside me. I sat down on the foundation. I put my face in my hands. Bea found me there an hour later. She crossed the wet grass without a word, sat down beside me on the cold concrete, and pressed a thermos of coffee into my hand. She wrapped an old wool blanket around my shoulders, and she sat there with me in the gray April morning for a very long time. That afternoon, my phone rang. I had bought a cheap prepaid phone with my second paycheck from Hollis. Only Bea and Hollis and Eleanor and Adeline had the number. It was an unknown caller. I answered it. "Hello, Ethan." My Uncle Dorsey's voice. Smooth, quiet, pleasant. I did not speak. "I know where you are. I have known for 2 weeks. You are at the Callaway property in Ashford Hollow. You are working on an unfinished house that does not legally belong to you. I have been very patient, Ethan. I have not called the authorities. I have not told them where to find their missing patient." He paused. "Let me feel it." but my patience is running out. So here is what is going to happen. You are going to come back to Pinehurst by Friday afternoon. You are going to check yourself in voluntarily. And if you do that, I will not press charges. I will not have you sent somewhere worse." He paused again. "And Ethan, about the storm. I do hope no one was hurt. It would be a shame if anything else happened to that property." He hung up. I sat on B's porch step holding the phone in my hand. I did not move. I just stared at the phone, and I realized something that changed everything. He had not just been waiting. He had been watching. Hollis Whitley drove out to the house the next morning at sunrise. His pickup was loaded with fresh lumber. He did not bring a bill. Tornado damage. Insurance is going to take 6 months to settle on my end. Don't worry about it. I'll pay you. You'll pay me when the house is done. Now get to work, son. By the end of that day, 6 other people had shown up. The man with the well pump story. Curtis the electrician. 2 of the Methodist women who brought their grown sons. A young carpenter named Jim from down the road who had heard about the storm and had taken a personal day from his construction job. We rebuilt the east wall in 3 days. I worked harder than I have ever worked in my life. I barely slept. I ate sandwiches B brought out to the work site. My hands cracked open and bled into my work gloves. I did not care. By the end of the first week, the wall was back up. By the end of the second week, the new drywall was hung. By the end of the third week, I had repainted the kitchen. And in the middle of that third week on a Wednesday afternoon, while I was tearing out the splintered subflooring in what would be my bedroom, my crowbar caught on something underneath the wood. I knelt down. There was a hollow space in the floor joists, about the size of a brick. Something had been wedged into it. Something wrapped in oilcloth, just like the box on the bus. I pulled it out. Inside the oilcloth was a small tin box. Inside the tin box was a USB flash drive and a folded handwritten note. I read the note first. "Ethan, if you find this, it means you found your way home. I am sorry I could not tell you any of this when you were a boy. I was already losing my mind by the time I knew what your uncle had done, and I did not have the strength to fight him in court. So I hid the evidence here in the foundation of your house, where I knew he would never look. The flash drive has everything. Bank records. His signature side by side with hers. The investigator's full report. A recording I made of him admitting to it. Take this to a lawyer. Do not try to do it alone. I love you, boy. I have always loved you. Your grandfather Samuel." I held that note for a long time. Then I walked out of the house, drove to the Whitley hardware store, and asked Hollis Whitley if he knew a lawyer. Hollis closed the store an hour early that day. He drove me out to a farmhouse 15 minutes outside of Ashford Hollow where a woman named Imogene Holloway lived. Imogene was in her late 60s, retired from a long career as a prosecutor in Columbus. Now she kept a small garden, 2 dogs, and a one-woman law practice that handled wills, real estate, and the occasional small-town dispute. She wore a denim shirt and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She made us coffee. I gave her the flash drive. I gave her the journal. I gave her the stack of 147 letters. I gave her the private investigator's report. I gave her the deed and the savings passbook. I gave her the photocopies of the forged commitment papers and Dr. Hatch's sworn affidavit. She read for 2 hours without speaking. The light in her kitchen turned from afternoon gold to evening blue. The dogs lay at her feet. Hollis and I drank 3 cups of coffee. When she was finished, Imogene Holloway took off her reading glasses and folded her hands on top of the documents. "Mr. Boone, your grandfather was a meticulous man." "Yes, ma'am." He was also a man who, despite his illness, managed to build the most complete civil and criminal case against your uncle I have ever seen prepared by a non-attorney. He has dates, he has documents, he has notarized statements, he has a voice recording, and he has 9 years of letters showing a documented pattern of attempts to seek legal remedy. She looked at me over the top of her glasses. "Son, with your permission, I would like to make some phone calls tonight. To the Ross County Prosecutor's Office, to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and to a friend of mine at the FBI office in Cincinnati." "What about my paperwork, the Pinehurst paperwork?" "He says I'm still legally committed." Imogene smiled a small, tight, dangerous smile. "Mr. Boone, by the time I am finished making my phone calls, the paperwork from Pinehurst is going to be the least of your uncle's problems." 2 weeks went by. I kept working on the house. I kept showing up at Hollis's hardware store 3 mornings a week. I kept eating dinner at B's table. I did not hear from my uncle. I did not hear from Pinehurst. I did not hear anything. And then on a Thursday afternoon in late May, a dark blue sedan turned down the gravel road. My Uncle Dorsey was driving. A man in a gray suit sat in the passenger seat. Dorsey's lawyer, I figured. I was standing on the porch of the house with its new yellow paint the same color as the bus. I had finished painting it that morning. B had picked the color. Dorsey got out of the car. He looked at the house. His face went very still. "This is not your property, Ethan." "It is, sir. The deed has been in my name since I was 6 years old. That deed is part of your grandfather's estate. I am the executor of his estate. I am here to take possession of the property and to escort you back to Pinehurst, where you legally belong." He took a step forward. A red pickup truck turned down the gravel road behind his sedan, then Hollis Whitley's truck. Then a third truck I did not recognize. Eleanor Pike climbed out of her pickup. Hollis got out with his arms crossed. B. Calloway got out of the third truck carrying a manila folder. And then a fourth car came down the road. A small silver sedan. Imogene Holloway got out briefcase in hand, reading glasses on a chain. She walked up the gravel drive with the slow, calm pace of a woman who knew exactly where she was going. "Mr. Boone," she said pleasantly to my uncle, "I am Imogene Holloway. I represent your nephew. I believe we have some matters to discuss." Dorsey's face changed. Just slightly, a man recalculating. "I am here on a private family matter. You are here," Imogene said, "to attempt to take possession of a property that has been in your nephew's name for 13 years under a custodial deed that predates any power of attorney you ever held. You are also here, I assume, to try to enforce a behavioral commitment that was originally signed under medical paperwork that the FBI has now confirmed contains a forged physician's signature." Dorsey's lawyer in the gray suit closed his eyes. Just for a second. Imogene opened her briefcase. She handed Dorsey's lawyer a stack of documents. "That is a copy of the indictment that will be unsealed tomorrow morning in Ross County Superior Court. The charges include grand theft insurance fraud, falsification of medical records, conspiracy, and unlawful restraint of a minor. The total dollar amount involved is $180,000 plus 13 years of accrued interest, bringing the restitution figure to just over $240,000. The unlawful restraint charge alone carries a sentence of up to 12 years. She paused. "My client will not be returning to Pinehurst. My client's property will not be transferred to your client. And my client's mother's life insurance proceeds, plus interest, will be returned to him through restitution as part of the criminal case." Dorsey's lawyer looked at his client. He shook his head once, very slightly. Then he turned and walked back to the sedan. Dorsey did not move. He stood there in the middle of the gravel drive in front of the yellow house his father had built, surrounded by the people who had spent the last 2 months helping me put that house back together. And then something happened that I did not expect. He sat down. On the gravel. Right there in the driveway. He put his hands over his face. "I was going to put it back. I was always going to put it back. I just needed time. You had 19 years. I was in debt. I owed people. I was scared. And then your grandfather started writing letters and I thought he would put it together and I panicked and..." He looked up at me. His eyes were full of tears. And I will tell you sitting here now that I did not feel anything for him. Not anger, not pity, not satisfaction. I just felt very, very tired. You took my mother's money. You took my grandfather's last 6 years. And you put me in a place where they treated me like I was sick when I was not. You did that to me, Dorsey. You did that to me for 19 years. He could not look at me. A state trooper's cruiser turned down the gravel road. Then a second one. Imogene had made her phone calls. The troopers were polite. They were calm. They read my uncle his rights on the porch of the yellow house. They put him in handcuffs. They put him in the back of the cruiser. He did not look at me again. The cruiser backed down the gravel road. The dust settled. The afternoon was very quiet. A red-winged blackbird called from the creek. Hollis Whitley put his hand on my shoulder and held it there. He did not need to say anything. Eleanor Pike was crying openly the way a woman cries when something she has been holding for years finally lets her go. B. Calloway came up the porch steps. She wrapped both her arms around me, pressed my face against the soft canvas of her work jacket, and she rocked me gently the way you might rock a child. "You are safe now, sweetheart," she whispered. "You are safe now." That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone on the porch of the yellow house. The sun was setting over the trees. The creek was running steady behind the property. The bus that Eleanor Pike had arranged to have, towed down from Dayton 2 weeks earlier, sat off to the side of the yard, its flat tires sunk into the spring grass, the strip of blue tape still on the mirror. I had not opened the white envelope yet, the one with the words for Ethan on the front in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. I had been waiting. I had told myself I was waiting until the house was finished. But the truth was, I had been afraid. Afraid of what a last letter from a dying man might do to a heart that had already been broken too many times. I went inside the house. I took the envelope down from the shelf in the living room, the shelf where I had been keeping the journal and the savings passbook and the deed and B's wooden box with my mother's letters. I sat down at the kitchen table, the new kitchen table. Hollis had brought it from the back of his store as a housewarming gift the week before. Solid oak, a little scratched, just right. I opened the envelope. There was a letter folded twice, and a small wallet-sized photograph. I read the letter. "Ethan, if you are reading this, it means you found the bus and the box and your way south to the house. Good. I knew you would. You were always smarter and braver than the world gave you credit for. I want to tell you about this house. I started building it when you were 6 years old because I wanted to give you something that could not move. You and I, we lived on that bus for a long time. I would not trade those years for anything. But a bus is a place you pass through. A house is a place you come back to. I wanted you to have a place to come back to. The money in the bank is yours. Every dollar. I saved it a little at a time from the work I did on the road. It is not much, but it should be enough to get you started. The land is yours too. I put it in your name the day I bought it so that no one could ever take it from you. Not your uncle. Not the state. Not anyone. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago, and I am sorry I did not. Your mother did not leave you. She died in a car accident on an icy road coming home from her shift at the hospital. She was a nurse, and she worked hard, and she was coming home to you. She was always coming home to you. I should have told you that years ago. I should have found the words. But every time I looked at your face, I could not be the one to put that hurt on you. So I am putting it here instead. In this letter. In this house. In everything I built. A home is not where you park, son. A home is where someone built something just for you. This is my something for you, Ethan. I love you, boy. I always have. I always will. Your grandfather, Samuel. I set the letter down on the kitchen table. I picked up the photograph. It was small, creased at one corner. A young woman with dark hair sitting on a porch step, holding a baby in her lap. She was laughing. The baby was reaching up to touch her chin. On the back, in faded ink, 2 words, Marin and Ethan. I unclasped the brass locket from around my neck. The locket my grandfather had given me when I was 4 years old. The locket that had been empty for 19 years. I folded the photograph very carefully. I worked it into the locket. It was a tight fit, but it closed. For the first time in my life, my locket had a face inside it. I held that locket in my hands, and I let the tears come. I cried for my mother, who had been laughing in a photograph holding her baby boy. I cried for my grandfather, who had spent 9 years writing letters and 4 years building a house and 6 years dying in a facility, just trying to leave me a way home. I cried for the boy in Pinehurst, who had counted 2,247 days. And then slowly the tears stopped, because the house was warm, and the porch light was on. And the photograph in my locket showed me very clearly that I had always been loved, from the very first moment. The next morning I walked out to the yellow bus. I had not been inside it since the day Eleanor towed it down from Dayton. I had been afraid, I think, of what it would feel like to sit in the driver's seat now that I knew everything. I climbed the 3 steps. The morning light came in through the dusty windows and fell across the cabinet doors my grandfather had sanded by hand, the flannel curtains, the pencil marks on the doorframe, the fold-down table where I had eaten 10,000 scrambled eggs as a small boy. I sat down in the driver's seat. I put both hands on the wheel. "I made it home, Pop," I said out loud. I made it home. The bus did not answer, but the morning light came in golden through the windshield, And somewhere in the trees behind the house, a red-winged blackbird called once, and I thought, maybe just maybe that was answer enough. 6 months passed. Autumn came to Ashford Hollow. The oaks along the property line turned bronze and gold. The creek ran cold and clear. I sat on the porch of the yellow house in the mornings drinking coffee, watching the mist rise off the grass. The criminal case against my uncle went quickly. He pled guilty to all charges to avoid a trial. He was sentenced to 11 years in state prison. The court ordered restitution of the full amount, plus interest. I received my mother's life insurance money in late October. Most of it. The court had to absorb some legal costs. I did not keep all of it. I gave $10,000 to Eleanor Pike to cover the 7 years of storage fees she had paid out of her own pocket. She refused at first. I left a cashier's check in her mailbox with a note that said, "Please." He would have wanted this. I gave $5,000 to the Methodist Church on Main Street, anonymous, for their meal program. I worked 3 mornings a week at Hollis Whitley's hardware store. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 7 sharp. I learned the inventory system. I learned how to cut keys. I learned the names of the regulars. In the afternoons, I fixed things for people. The word had gotten around the way it does in small towns. A widow on Maple Street with a leaky faucet. A teenager whose pickup truck had a cracked radiator hose. An elderly couple whose porch steps had rotted through. I did not charge them. A teenage boy asked me once, after I had replaced his radiator hose in 20 minutes on the shoulder of a county road, "How much do I owe you?" I told him what my grandfather had told every customer for 20 years on the road: help someone when you get the chance. That's how much. In November, a small package arrived at B's house, forwarded from Chillicothe Memorial Hospital. Imogene had written to them on my behalf back in September. She had asked whether the hospital might still have any of my mother's personal effects in storage. It was a long shot. 19 years was a long time. Most hospitals clear out lockers within a year. But Chillicothe Memorial had kept her things. A retired charge nurse had labeled the box with my mother's name and tucked it into a corner of a basement storage room, and it had simply stayed there. Year after year. Waiting. The hospital had finally sent it to me. I opened it on the kitchen table of the yellow house. Inside were the small ordinary things of a working woman's life. A name badge with her handwriting on the back. A pin from the nursing school she had attended in Athens, Ohio. A photograph of her standing next to a hospital cafeteria coffee machine, making a face at whoever was holding the camera. A worn paperback novel with her name written inside the cover. And at the bottom of the box, a small pink envelope. A birthday card she had bought but never gotten to give me. On the front, in steady, beautiful handwriting, 2 words. For Ethan. I opened it. Happy birthday, sweet boy. You are 1 year old today. You have changed everything about my life. I did not know I could love someone this much. I did not know it was possible. Wherever you go, whatever happens, I need you to know that you were wanted. You were wanted from the very first moment. Love, Mama. I sat on the porch of the yellow house, holding that birthday card, and I read it over and over until the sun went down. I want to ask you something before I finish this story. Have you ever waited a lifetime to hear the words you were wanted? Have you ever needed to hear them and not had a single person in your life who could say them? If you have, I want you to do something for me right now. Put your hand on your heart. Take a slow breath. And say it to yourself the way my mother said it to me. I was wanted. I have always been wanted. You were wanted, my friend. You still are. Now let me tell you about one more visit I made that fall. A week later, I drove up to Dayton with Bee in her old truck. I had asked Imogene to track down Adeline Foster. The Pinehurst administration had quietly let her go 3 months after I left. They suspected she had helped me, though they could not prove it. She had not contested the dismissal. She had moved back to a small town outside Dayton called Brookville, where her sister lived. I found her on a Sunday afternoon. She was sitting on her sister's front porch drinking iced tea, looking out at a garden full of late chrysanthemums. She was thinner than I remembered. Her hair had gone all the way white in the months since I had seen her last. She looked up when I came up the walk. She put her hand to her mouth. Oh, son. Oh, son. I knelt down in front of her porch chair, and I took her hand in both of mine. You saved my life, Adeline. You saved my life. I came to say thank you, and I came to ask if you would let me take care of you for a while, the way you took care of me. She cried then. So did I. So did her sister, who had come to the screen door and was standing there with a dish towel in her hand. I bought Adeline a small house 2 streets over from her sister's place that fall. I paid for it outright with money from my mother's restitution. I told her it was a gift. I told her she could have it for the rest of her life, and that nothing would ever be asked of her in return. She protested for about 10 minutes. Then she let me hand her the keys. Some debts you cannot pay back, my grandfather used to say. The best you can do is pay them forward. And sometimes, when life is very kind, you get to pay one of them back too. I sit on this porch in the evening now. The yellow house behind me has glass in every window. The plumbing runs hot and cold. The lights come on when I flip the switch. There are flannel curtains in the east-facing bedroom. B sewed them for me from the same pattern as the curtains on the bus. The shelf in the living room is getting crowded. The journal, the savings passbook, the deed, my grandfather's letter, my mother's birthday card, the framed photograph of her holding me, the brass locket I wear around my neck with her face inside it. The yellow bus is parked in the side yard now. Its flat tires are sunk into the grass. The blue tape is still on the mirror. I go out and sit in the driver's seat sometimes in the evenings. I put my hands on the wheel. I close my eyes. I can still hear my grandfather's voice, low and patient. Steady now, son. You got it. Steady now. The bus is where I survived. The house is where I belong. I am 19 years old. I have a home. I have work. I have a community that knew my grandfather and that somehow has decided to love me too. I have a locket that is not empty anymore. I have a kitchen table where I drink coffee in the mornings, and a porch where I watch the sun go down, and an east-facing window where the light comes in to wake me up. I spent my whole life on wheels. I'm not on wheels anymore. I am home. If you have made it all the way to the end of this story with me, thank you. Truly. Thank you for sitting with Ethan and with me through all of it. If your heart is full right now, if this story has touched the part of you that knows what it feels like to long for home, please subscribe to this channel. We tell stories here about second chances, about hope, about the families we are born into and the families we find, about the small, quiet miracles that happen when a stranger decides to be kind. Leave me a comment below. Tell me, when did you finally find the place you belonged? Was it where you expected? Or did it come from somewhere you never thought to look? Your story might be the one that gives another woman hope tonight. So share it. Speak it out loud. The world needs to hear it. Until next time, my friends, be gentle with yourselves. The light is coming. Go home.